This happened about 4 years ago, back when I was a freshman in college and still living in my hometown with my best friend. If you've ever lived in a place that feels completely stuck in time, that's the best way I can describe it. People there tend to fall into two categories: overly judgmental or genuinely unhinged. I could probably fill a notebook with stories just from that town alone. My roommate and I were both night owls, so eating dinner around midnight was pretty normal for us. One night we were craving meatballs, only to realize we had absolutely no ground beef. On top of that, I had managed to spill vodka all over my pillow earlier, so replacing that became part of the plan too. A late-night Walmart run felt harmless enough. There were several Walmarts in town, but only a couple that felt even remotely safe at night. The closest one was about 10 blocks away, but it had a reputation we didn't feel like testing. So we drove a little farther to a location about 10 minutes west of us. We got there around midnight, and the store was mostly empty. That location usually was, especially late at night. We were relaxed, joking around, not really paying attention to anything beyond our shopping list. We even chatted with a couple of employees we recognized. One guy in home improvement showed us silly things he made with paint chips, and another worked electronics who we'd gone to high school with. It all felt normal, even comfortable. At some point, we realized we needed a basket and started heading toward the front of the store. That's when something in my head clicked. I noticed a man standing nearby and had the strange feeling that I'd seen him before. Not just once, but repeatedly. I slowed down without really meaning to, trying to piece it together. That's when it hit me. He had been in every aisle we'd been in. Grocery, home goods, even the paint section. Every time we moved, he appeared nearby again. He never picked anything up. He just lingered. I made eye contact with my roommate and gave her that look that doesn't need words. She immediately understood. We changed direction and walked straight to the front desk where security was stationed. I asked if someone could walk us to our car. The guard didn't hesitate, and we thanked him more than once as we left. Once we were in the car, I drove like I always did when I felt uneasy, taking back roads, cutting through neighborhoods, constantly checking the mirrors. I knew the chances of being followed were slim, but I wasn't taking any risks. We still needed ground beef, so after looping around for a while, we decided to go to another Walmart across town. This one was newer, brighter, and in a better area. I scanned the parking lot before we got out and didn't see anything concerning. We parked right by the entrance. Inside, everything felt fine again. The store was quiet, clean, and mostly empty. I kept watching behind us out of habit, but I didn't see him anywhere. Eventually, I relaxed. We finished shopping and headed to checkout. There were barely any customers, just a few employees. My roommate went first while I tried to shove my replacement pillow into a bag that was clearly too small. I looked up. He was there. Same man, same face, same blue trucker hat tilted at an angle. He looked older up close, worn down, thin, with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. He stepped into the empty checkout lane beside us and casually tossed a pack of gum onto the belt. That was it. Just gum. My roommate had her back to him, completely unaware. I felt every muscle in my body tense. "Grab your bags," I said quietly. Then louder, "We're leaving, now." She didn't question it. She took off toward the exit without even turning around. I told the cashier to call security, but he just stared at me like he didn't understand what I was saying. We ran. It probably looked ridiculous. Me clutching poorly bagged pillows, my roommate holding ground beef, both of us moving as fast as we could toward the doors. I glanced back once and saw him calmly paying, watching us the entire time. As we reached the exit, I yelled to security that the man in the blue hat had been following us and asked them to walk us to our car. We didn't stop running. Thankfully, we were parked right by the entrance. We unlocked the car, jumped inside, and took off immediately. As I pulled out, I saw security grabbing his arm near the doors while he stared after us. I drove for a long time after that, taking random turns until I felt sure no one was following us. I still don't know what his intentions were or why he chose us. Maybe he'd been following people in stores. Maybe it was coincidence. But the fact that he bought nothing except gum and that he showed up twice sticks with me. That look he gave us wasn't accidental. If there's one thing I took away from that night, it's this. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I grew up in a very small town in northern Kentucky. And when I say small, I mean the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Crime is rare enough to make the news, and people still leave their doors unlocked without thinking twice. It was quiet, predictable, and deeply Southern in that way, where Friday nights revolved around football games, church on Sundays, and little else. You could walk from one end of town to the other in about 20 minutes. There was no bus system for school because it wasn't needed. You just walked. This happened when I was 16. It was a typical Friday night in the fall, and I was at home watching my little brother Ross, who was 9 at the time. Our parents were out, and we were killing time the way we usually did, sitting on the floor playing video games. Around that time, it was almost always Super Smash Bros. Melee on the GameCube. Ross was ridiculously good for his age. He always played Roy, I always played Marth, and every match turned into a very serious competition. Earlier that year, new neighbors had moved in next door. They had a kid named Austin who was Ross's age, and the two of them became inseparable almost immediately. That night, Austin had gone with his parents to the high school football game, which basically meant the entire town was at the stadium. I wasn't interested in the game itself. Once you'd seen one, you'd seen them all. But my brother suddenly got it into his head that we should go get Austin and bring him back to hang out. His mom didn't want him walking home alone, and Ross was relentless about it. He begged, pleaded, and promised that once we got Austin, we could all play together. I didn't want to go. I really didn't. But the walk was short, maybe 10 minutes downhill, and I figured we'd grab Austin and head straight back. No lingering, no crowds. So we headed out just before full dark. We walked up our dead-end street, turned left onto the main road, and started heading toward the sports complex at the bottom of the hill. From the top, we could already hear the band and the crowd. Cars were lined along the street closer to the stadium, but the stretch we were on was mostly empty. Ross, as usual, was talking non-stop. Random facts, stories about school, things he and Austin had done earlier in the week. I was half listening, half watching the road ahead. About halfway there, I noticed a gold SUV pull over across the street. It sat there for a few seconds. Then a man got out just as we passed, putting him behind us. I didn't think much of it at first. Mid-40s maybe, tall and thin. At the time, I just assumed he was heading to the game like everyone else. We kept walking. After about half a minute, I heard footsteps behind us. I glanced back casually, expecting him to pass us. Instead, I saw that he was closing the distance. Still didn't panic. Maybe he was in a hurry. Another minute passed. He still hadn't gone by. I turned around again, and this time my stomach dropped. He was uncomfortably close. Close enough that I could see his face clearly. He was smiling, but not in a friendly way, and his arms were extended forward, reaching toward my brother. He was inches away from grabbing Ross's arm. I reacted without thinking. I wrapped my arm around my brother's back and pulled him slightly toward me, putting myself between them as much as I could. For a few seconds, everything felt suspended. I scanned the street quickly. No cars, no people, no one watching. I leaned down and told Ross as calmly as I could that we were going to hurry and see who could get to the stadium faster. I started walking faster, practically pushing him along. He went with it, thinking it was a game. We were close now. I could see the entrance to the stadium at the bottom of the hill. I glanced back again. The man was speed-walking to keep up, still directly behind my brother, matching our pace. He was gaining ground. That same expression was still on his face. That's when fear really set in. I told Ross to run. He took off immediately, smiling, giving it everything he had. I ran beside him, watching the man more than the road. And then I saw it. The man broke into a run, not jogging, running. At that point, there was no doubt what was happening. He wasn't trying to get to the game. He wasn't distracted. He was chasing us. We sprinted downhill, my brother pumping his legs as hard as he could, determined to win what he thought was a race. I remember thinking how close we were. How if we could just make it to the stadium grounds, there would be people everywhere. The moment we passed under the stone archway at the entrance, everything changed. It was halftime. Adults were standing around smoking, talking, milling about. Noise, lights, people everywhere. I turned around just in time to see the man slow to a stop. His expression shifted instantly. Surprise. Panic. He locked eyes with me for a brief moment, then looked around at the crowd, turned, and walked back the way he came. Ross was out of breath and completely unaware of what had almost happened. I told him to give me a second, and watched the man retreat up the hill, cross the street, get into his SUV, and drive away. Only then did it really hit me how close we'd come to something going very wrong. We found Austin, but I refused to walk home. We waited until the game ended and got a ride with his parents. I never told my parents what happened. I never told my brother. Even now, years later, I don't see a reason to put that fear in his head. I never reported it either. I don't know who that man was, where he came from, or what might have happened if the timing had been different. I just know that if the crowd hadn't been there, I don't think the story would have ended the same way. For the first and only time in my life, I was grateful for a packed football stadium full of people I usually tried to avoid. This happened when I was somewhere between 7 and 9 years old, back in the mid-'80s. I grew up in what I can only describe as the small-town version of a rough neighborhood. It wasn't huge, but it wasn't especially safe either. That year was the first time my mom had started letting me leave our backyard on my own, which felt like a big deal to me at the time. It was just before Christmas, and I had $10 whole to spend. I wanted to buy small presents for my family, and the downtown area was only a short walk away, so I decided to go by myself. There was old snow on the ground, the sky was overcast, and it wasn't especially cold, just gray and quiet in that winter way. As I stepped onto the main road, a van drove past me. In my memory, it was a silver minivan, though I can't swear to that. As it passed, the driver honked the horn in a little rhythm, the shave and a haircut tune. Someone inside waved at me. I didn't recognize them, but I waved back without thinking much of it. The van pulled over not far ahead of me, and the passenger door opened. A man leaned across and asked if I wanted a ride. I froze completely. Even at that age, I knew something wasn't right. I remember the inside of the van feeling wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I don't remember exactly what I said, only that I said no and shut the door. The van drove off. I kept walking toward downtown, trying to calm myself down. A minute later, I heard the horn again, the same little tune. The van drove past me once more, then again from the opposite direction. Each time it passed, it honked. This time, I didn't wave. I kept my eyes down and focused on getting closer to where there would be more people around. The van continued circling, passing me multiple times. By then, I knew I was being followed. I was terrified. This was long before cell phones, and my mom was at work. If something happened, there wouldn't have been anyone to call. I finally reached a small shop I knew well and ran inside. I stayed there for a long time, browsing slowly and pretending everything was normal. I must have been in there close to an hour. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to leave. I didn't see the van at first, and for a moment I felt safe. Then I heard the horn again. I panicked and ran toward the one place I could think of where a vehicle couldn't follow me, a large park that bordered the downtown area. There was a hilly section with no paved paths, and I cut through there as fast as I could. At that age, my fear had turned the situation into something almost unreal, like the van itself was the threat, not the person inside it. Looking back now, I realized that wasn't the smartest choice. There was an active fire station nearby, and that would have been a much safer place to go. But I got lucky. I found a back way through the park and made it home without seeing the van again. Once my mom got home, I told her everything. The police came and asked me questions, but when they asked what the man looked like, my mind went blank. In my memory, his face was just gone, replaced by a dark, featureless shape. Even now, when I think about it, that's still how I remember him. I never saw that van again. Years later, after we had moved to a different place, we started getting strange phone calls where the only sound was a man breathing on the line. I don't know if it was related, but I've always wondered. I don't live in that town anymore, but I still go back from time to time. That memory has never really left me. I used to live about 45 minutes into the bush, in a tiny mountain town where winter populations dropped to maybe 300 or 400 people on a good year. It was quiet in a way that felt peaceful at first, but also isolating. My husband worked away on a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off rotation, so when he was gone, it was just me, my 2-year-old daughter, and our animals. There was no local police presence. If you called for help, response time could be anywhere from 25 minutes to over an hour depending on how serious the situation was. Because of that, when we talked about getting a dog, we knew we wanted one that looked intimidating enough to discourage anyone from getting too close. That's how we ended up with a Rottweiler. Ironically, she turned out to be an absolute sweetheart. She also had an uncommon name, and in a town that small, people recognized her before they recognized me. I ended up making a lot of dog friends, people who would ask if they could take her along on hikes with their own dogs. She was well behaved, loved the exercise, and always came home happy and exhausted, so I usually said yes. One evening, one of those friends asked late in the day if he could take her on a hike with him and his dog. His dog had poor eyesight, and mine would naturally guide her along the trail. I didn't think much of it. But partway through their hike, a storm rolled in fast. The wind picked up, rain came down hard, and visibility dropped. He called me from his place and asked if he could keep my dog overnight, instead of bringing her back out in the weather. He said they were soaked and already inside, and that my dog was settled and comforting his. I hesitated. My husband was away, and something about the sudden storm made me uneasy. Still, it was dark, pouring rain, and I didn't want to send him back out, so I agreed. That night, after putting my daughter to bed, I stepped out onto my covered deck for a bit, watched the storm move through, and then went to sleep. My bedroom backed onto that deck, which was enclosed and locked. I usually left the blinds open since there was nothing but forest beyond it. At some point during the night, I rolled over and noticed light coming through the window. I was half asleep, disoriented, squinting at the glow from the string lights that were hung around the deck railing near my window. For a brief moment, through that foggy, just-woken state, I thought I saw someone standing there, close to the glass, hands raised as if trying to see inside. I remember feeling suddenly exposed and uncomfortable. I pulled the covers up and told myself I was imagining it. My dog would have reacted if someone was there. I had to be dreaming. When I looked again, the lights were off. I fell back asleep almost immediately. The next morning felt completely normal. My friend dropped my dog off, everything seemed fine, and I didn't think about the night at all until I stepped outside and noticed the string lights were on. The memory hit me all at once. Those lights were cheap, battery-powered, and had an irritating button system. One press turned them on, the second turned them off, but activated a timer, and the third shut them off completely. I hated that setup so much that I never touched the button. My daughter was too small to reach it. For the lights to be on again that morning, someone had to press it, and stop at the second click. My heart started racing as I pulled the batteries out and looked around the deck. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed. But near the door, there were marks on the floor where the deadbolt scraped, as if it had been forced upward. Someone had been on my deck. Someone had been close enough to look inside my bedroom. And it happened on the one night my dog wasn't home. I don't know if I startled them when I moved, or if the locked door made them reconsider. What I do know is they didn't steal anything, even though there were valuables sitting out in plain sight. Whatever they were there for, it wasn't burglary. It's been 3 years, and I still don't know who it was or what they intended. I don't know if my dog being gone mattered, but my gut tells me it did. I don't live there anymore, and I don't miss that kind of quiet. A few years ago, I was living with my sister in a small mountain town in Australia. I was around 20 at the time, and because of some long-standing mental health stuff, I've always been overly alert around strangers. I notice patterns quickly, sometimes too quickly, but it's something I've learned to trust when my body starts reacting before my brain catches up. There were 2 ways to get from the bus stop to my sister's place. One was shorter but steep, the other took a little longer and was mostly flat. Both routes passed by a primary school with a big oval, and it was a common place for locals to walk their dogs in the evenings. One afternoon, I took the longer route. It was still daylight, quiet, nothing unusual. About halfway along, I heard music behind me. I turned around and saw a guy walking a short distance back, staring down at his phone with music playing out loud. It didn't immediately concern me, so I turned forward and kept walking. He closed the distance between us pretty quickly. I moved slightly to the side, assuming he was about to pass me. He didn't. I glanced back again and noticed the music had stopped. He was still looking at his phone, still directly behind me, and adjusting his path whenever I did. It felt deliberate, even if I couldn't fully explain why. I crossed the road slowly, testing it. He crossed too, matching my steps almost exactly. That was when my stomach tightened. He was much closer now, close enough that I could hear his breathing behind me. I decided the safest thing to do was keep him where I could see him. As soon as he reached my side, I turned, smiled, and said hello in what I hoped sounded casual. Where we lived, talking to strangers wasn't unusual. He looked startled, mumbled something back, and avoided eye contact completely. We started walking side by side, talking. Or rather, I was talking. He kept trying to drift behind me, and every time he did, I slowed down just enough to force him forward again. Up close, he was big, tall, broad, clearly much stronger than me. That fact sat heavily in the back of my mind. He told me he lived a few towns away and had recently graduated. He said he was visiting his old teachers. That explanation didn't sit right, because the building we were approaching was a primary school, not a high school. My alarm bells went off properly then. As we got closer to the oval, I noticed a class exiting one of the buildings and heading toward the gym. I pointed toward them and said something like, "Oh hey, is one of those your teachers? We should go say hi." His reaction was immediate. He refused, became agitated, and started making excuses. I used that moment to step away, saying I was cutting through the school grounds to get home. I watched him carefully as I did. He stopped walking entirely and began backing away, clearly distressed. I crossed onto the oval and was nearly halfway across when the students finished filing into the gym. As soon as the area cleared, I glanced behind me. That was when he yelled for me to get back there and started running straight at me. I ran. I went straight into the gym, told the nearest teacher what was happening, and was quickly taken to the principal's office. By the time anyone looked outside, the guy was gone. Before I even spoke, I noticed several staff members talking seriously, all glancing toward me. It turned out the story was more complicated than I expected. The guy really had graduated recently, but he was 13. He had an intellectual disability and didn't understand personal boundaries. He had been told he could visit the school, but only under specific conditions, which he wasn't following that day. I felt embarrassed at first, shaken by the idea that I'd been that afraid of a teenager. But the next morning, police came to speak to me and explained that it wasn't an isolated incident. His parents had insisted on police involvement because similar situations had happened before. After that, and a few unrelated incidents near the same school, I stopped walking that route entirely. I still trust my instincts. If anything, that experience reinforced that fear doesn't always come from exaggeration. It comes from noticing something isn't right, even when you don't yet know why. When I was 16, I spent a lot of time walking alone. I lived in a small town where not much ever happened, and most days felt exactly the same. School, home, repeat. Autumn was the only time of year that made things feel different. The air was colder, the light faded earlier, and everything felt quieter, like the town was holding its breath. Just outside town was Blackwood Forest. Everyone knew it, and everyone had heard stories about it. Kids went there during the day to mess around or smoke, but nobody stayed after dark. Deep inside the forest was an old logging cabin people called the Miller Place. It had been abandoned for decades, and depending on who you asked, it was either just an old building falling apart, or something you were better off avoiding altogether. I never really believed in the stories, but I couldn't deny that the place had a reputation. My friends Jake and Maya loved bringing it up whenever they thought I was bored. They joked that I needed to scare myself just to feel something again. I laughed it off at the time, but the idea stuck with me more than I wanted to admit. One afternoon, after another argument with my dad over nothing important, I decided to go for a long walk. I told him I'd be back before dark. He barely looked up from the TV. That wasn't unusual. I packed a small backpack with a flashlight, a bottle of water, and my dad's old hunting knife, more for peace of mind than anything else. I didn't plan on using it. The forest looked normal at first. The trail I followed was familiar, and I'd walked it plenty of times before. Leaves crunched under my boots, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine. It felt good to be away from everything. As I went deeper, the path narrowed and the light faded. The forest grew thicker, quieter. The colors shifted from warm reds and oranges to dull browns and gray. It felt colder too, even though the weather hadn't changed much. By the time I reached the clearing where the Miller Place stood, the sun was already sinking. The cabin looked worse than I expected. Parts of the roof had collapsed, and vines crawled up the walls like they were slowly pulling it back into the ground. The windows were dark and empty. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. I stood there longer than I meant to, debating whether to go inside. Everything about the place felt wrong, but I'd already come this far. Turning back felt like admitting I'd let myself get scared by stories. I pushed the door open. It gave way easily and fell inward with a loud crack. Dust filled the air, and for a second I couldn't see anything. When it settled, I stepped inside. The cabin was one large room. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. Old papers and debris were piled in the corners. It smelled like rot and cold wood. I called out, half expecting someone to answer even though I knew that was impossible. Nothing did. I turned on my flashlight and started looking around. That's when I noticed something small near the far wall, half hidden under a stack of old newspapers. It was a locket. Gold-colored, scratched and worn, but intact. I don't know why I picked it up. I should have left it where it was. When I opened it, there was a small photo inside. A little girl. The picture was faded, but her face was clear enough. She wasn't smiling. She looked serious, almost sad. I closed it and put it in my pocket. That's when the temperature inside the cabin dropped noticeably. I remember thinking it must be a draft, but it didn't feel natural. The air felt heavy. Then I heard something. A dull thump, like something shifting behind me. I turned around quickly, but the room looked exactly the same. I told myself I was done and headed back toward the door. That's when I heard it again. A soft sound, almost like laughter. Not loud, not playful, just barely there. I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand as I scanned the room. The sound came again, closer this time. I didn't wait to figure it out. I ran. The moment I stepped outside, the forest felt different, darker. The path I'd taken in suddenly seemed unfamiliar. I moved as fast as I could, branches scraping at my arms and face. The flashlight barely helped. The beam caught leaves, trees, shadows that didn't seem to move the way they should. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow, uneven. And beneath that, the same faint sound, following me through the trees. I tripped and fell hard, losing the flashlight. Panic took over as I scrambled on the ground, finally finding it under a bush. When I stood up, the beam caught something on the path ahead. A footprint. Small, like a child's. Then I saw her. She stood between the trees, maybe 20 feet away. Small, pale, wearing a torn white dress. She didn't move. She just stood there, head tilted slightly, like she was watching me. I didn't wait to see more. I ran again, ignoring the pain in my ankle, ignoring everything except getting out. The sounds followed me the whole way, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Eventually, I broke out of the forest and onto the road. The streetlights felt unreal, like I'd stepped into a different world. I collapsed right there, shaking and gasping for air. I made it home somehow. I don't remember the walk. My dad was still watching TV when I came in. I locked the door behind me and sat there for a long time. I never told anyone the full story. I still have the locket. It sits in a drawer, untouched. I don't go deep into Blackwood Forest anymore. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear that sound far away.